Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Phil Wang to talk all about his latest comedy special, Wang and Their Baby. And actually, in starting off and talking about the titling of this, I love how when you first started out doing comedy, that you actually made a really conscious effort to repeat your name and put it into your material so that it was this subconscious way of audiences learning who you were a lot more. But now it
Yeah.
feels like it has really become a lot of your material's intent with the names of your specials, like the last one being Philly, Philly, Wang, Wang. And I was just interested in how that relationship with the way that you've titled things or used your name as comedy has actually changed over your career.
Well, as you say, when I first started, and the first time I really did it was my first live at the Apollo set here in the UK. And I just go, Phil Wang, it's me, Phil Wang, Phil Wang, Phil, and just made a whole routine about my name, just as you say, so that I would drill it into people's minds. I don't even think it was subliminal. You know that joke in The Simpsons? We have subliminal, we have liminal, we have superliminal. And Bart goes, what's superliminal? Hey, join the Navy. That's I was doing superliminal NLP basically with my name. And the thing about titles is you have to come up with a title oftentimes long before you've come up with the show. And so you need, unless you have a very strong idea of what you're talking about early on, you need a title that gives you a lot of leeway. And a pun in a name usually does that because you can't guarantee much, but you can guarantee that I'll be in my special. Right. So, and people just have always liked my surname. It took me a while to accept, but people have always called me Phil Wang. They don't call me Phil. They say, "Hey, Phil Wang." People just like saying it. So give the people what they want. Is
And
my
there's a lot of
attitude.
good wordplay you can do with it, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot of ang words. Thank goodness.
I was also interested about your journey and really figuring out what your voice as a comedian was, because going back to when you first started doing stand up when you were in school, you've talked in the past about how you would try observational storytelling or, kind of having an overarching theme, or you'd have a period of time where you were trying things that were very much one-liners. And I was interested in how being able to have a space that felt really free to try a lot of different styles landed you in the voice and style that you have at this point.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm still looking for my voice. I'm very envious of comedians who have such a distinct voice, and I've always had it. For me, that my stand up has always been about the ideas and finding what the funny ideas are and trying my best to articulate the funny idea or the funny perspective or the funny reversal of an observation. My voice has changed and continues to change. I think I'm now allowing myself to be a lot sillier. I became quite serious as a stand-up. Um, I don't know what that was about. I think we all got a bit serious around 2016. The election of Donald Trump up through into COVID, and then all the stuff that happened then. I always feel when the world is silly, comedians get serious, and I think I kind of fell into that. But now that that's sort of passed, I've recognized that I need to be silly, and I'm letting myself be sillier. And so, Wang and Their Baby is probably the silliest I've been in a show. And I do a lot of silly faces and voices, and I go on flights of fancy that I wouldn't have done beforehand. So my voice is always changing, but it's getting sillier. Hopefully, that's what I'm trying to do. Also, more Malaysian. My accent started to come back a couple of years ago, and so sillier and more Malaysian is where I'm hoping my voice will go.
I love it. And with this special as well, you've also been able to record it and release it at a time where the material feels much closer to when you wrote it, because your last special, you were supposed to tape at some point in 2020. And then obviously it got pushed back by about a year and a half. And, so at that point, you have a very different relationship with the material if a year and a half
Yeah.
has passed in between, and especially with everything in the world at that point. And so what was the difference in going into this and having more of an immediate presence with the material at the time that you were taping it?
It's a huge difference. That last special was affected by COVID substantially, and it ended up being like was the first 10, 15 minutes of it was about COVID, which at the time felt absolutely necessary because there's the elephant in the room. But now really dates it, right? And the last thing people want to hear about is COVID. This time around, this special feels like my first authentic special in a way. It feels like the first special that is untethered by a great global catastrophe, and my own psyche is less affected. I watched the last special and I can see the pandemic in my eyes. I can see it in my posture, and I can see the year and a half of frightening loneliness I've sort of we all had been through. And you can feel the room is kind of half empty because of social distancing, and you can sense that I'm not connecting with people because they've got masks on. Whereas this one, it was the way my special was always meant to be, and I sort of, for that reason, thought let's go completely opposite the last time. A smaller room, absolutely rammed with people with no masks, obviously. So it's a world of difference, and I think it definitely shows.
And the show opens with observational humor, where you're coming in and basically saying the difference between Chinese people and white people is that white people are afraid of reheating their rice.
Yeah.
And I love it because it's a universal truth that people know, but there's something about observational humor where it's the first person kind of saying it out loud and framing it in that way for the audience. And so, how did you feel that opening the show with that particular observation was going to put the audience in exactly the right pocket for what you wanted to set them up for the entire hour?
Yeah, I think there's something fun about just starting an hour show with something just really abrupt and just like going straight into race stuff with no apology, no introduction, no, hey, how's everyone doing? All right, yeah. It's just like, wow. It's also like a very social media age way to start a special, no one has any attention span. Just get into it right now, you know? And the funny thing about that routine is I noticed that white people were terrified of reheating rice. I never heard of it until I moved to the UK. And I thought, oh, I think there's something funny in this. There must be some jokes in this. And the first time I got on stage and went, so I think the main difference between white people and Chinese people is white people are terrified of reheating rice. And that got a huge laugh. I was not expecting it to get a laugh at all. For me, I was just setting up, I was just like introing the idea. And I realized, oh, wow, there's something in this, I guess. People really resonate with this. And so, it doesn't matter how long you do stand up, laughs will take you by the surprise. Sometimes a joke you think is hilarious will get nothing. Sometimes you think you got nothing and people find it hilarious. And you have to roll with that. And so I just thought I would open with what I think you should try and open with as strong a routine as possible to get people in. And that rice routine is the routine that people quote to me the most when I was on tour. So I thought that makes the most sense to open with.
I also love the idea that you're bringing up the fact that that wasn't originally the punchline, that was the lead into it, because I've heard you talk about the way that you write your material and that very frequently you'll actually find the punchline first and then work backwards to the lead
Mm.
into it. And I was just very interested in what that looks like, especially when you're workshopping an hour's worth of material, because that's a huge amount to be playing around with. And I love that it's such a non-linear process for you.
Yeah, non-linear is the word for sure. I've made shows over the course of a year. I've made them over the course of 3 months because I had to. So you can obviously it's possible to compress all this progress into whatever period of time is allocated to it. I'll get a funny phrase or idea in my head and I'll think, oh, that's a funny thing to end at. Let's build the bridge to get there. Yeah, for sure. And then along the way, it's kind of like stepping stones to cross a river. That's kind of how I think about it. The other bank is the punchline, but if you don't put these little laughs, these little stones across the way, you're going to fall into the water and get swept away. So they have to be regular enough, but not so regular that there's nowhere to breathe.
What has been that journey of the way that you write notes and write material for yourself changed as well? Because it sounds like that it used to be a very meticulous process of writing every single thought and idea out fully as a baked in piece verbatim. And now it's more just being able to jot down bulletin points. And so the shorthand that you have within yourself has really changed and evolved over the years as well, by the sounds of it.
Definitely. I just write an idea on my notes and I'll do it on stage and try and improvise a way to it and record it, and then I hold on to that bit, hold on to the lines that work, drop the ones that don't, and it just kind of metastasizes from there. Uh, uh, I it definitely has become more casual. When I first started, I mean, I'm talking about like at uni, I would write the entire routine, like you say, word for word, on a Word document and print it out and like study it and read learn the lines. But it's just not tenable for an hours long show. And so you train yourself to learn this muscle memory of how each routine goes. What I find harder to remember is the order of the routines. That's a hard bit to remember. Once you're in a routine, you know it. But when you get to the end, that's the tough bit. It's like, oh, what comes next? So then it's in your interest to design and arrange a set list in a way that the ideas make sense from one to the other, because then it makes it easier for you to remember how it goes.
Right, because even in your special, you talk about how your memory isn't that great. So have you just
Yeah.
found lots of ways to kind of trick yourself into remembering the material in specific ways?
Yeah, I have to use mnemonics and things and thought palaces to remember. Yeah. My memory is yeah. I've there's an Easter egg. I think there's an Easter egg between the specials that I do the same joke about my memory, and I want people to think that I forgot that I did it in the last special. I don't think anyone will spot it, but I think it's funny.
I'm going to go looking for it after this now.
uh,
I also wanted to ask about moments where you actually find writing under deadlines and under pressure to be something that's really conducive for you. And, you've had times where you've been going into a comedy night and it's more of a work in progress evening, and you actually get to the venue early and will be writing things while you're there. And
yeah.
how does sometimes the idea of having that pressure of, I literally have to deliver this at 8 o'clock tonight in the room I'm already in, really help you to focus in sometimes?
The deadline looming over you of I've got to be on stage in 40 minutes really gets the mind going. And also, I think it's easy to forget that being on a stand-up stage is a very, very unique context. And you can sit at home in a room and try and type out funny ideas and go, "Oh, that's really funny," in my room on my own on the piece of paper in my home. And you get on stage and it just doesn't translate. Whereas if you're already there, you're tuned in to what's going to work in that room. You're looking at the people, you can sense them, you can sense their energy, you can see the context right in front of you, you can feel it, and it's much easier to imagine what's going to work up there. And so just being in the environment where you're going to tell the joke helps write the joke, I find. Yeah, yeah, for
I also
sure.
love the space where you taped this special at the Globe
Mm.
Theatre, especially because it's all lit by candlelight as well. And so, how did that really influence and shape the overall look and feel that you wanted for this special?
I wanted it to be very different to the last one. The last one was at the London Palladium, which is this very big venue. And I thought that the way a lot of us watch stand up now has changed substantially. In the screens that we watch stand up on have become smaller and smaller and smaller. And the experience has become more and more intimate. Stand up is now most likely something a person is going to watch on their own on their phone. And so I felt like recording it somewhere that's a big space doesn't make so much sense anymore. And I wanted to reflect this sense of how we watch stand up now, which is on a small scale on a small screen. And I thought that what reflect that nicely is a small room, the ratios of which are similar. I don't know if this is sounding too mercenary, but the ratios of the room I thought are similar to the 4:3 ratio of an Instagram grid post. Is that too technical? But I thought
Love
this
it.
is perfect. This is perfect, because the Palladium, the stage goes like this across. That's not the shape of our phones. The San Maker Playhouse is like this, and that is the shape of our phones. So that was part of the reason. Another reason is that the sound that an audience creates when they're big and when they're small is very different, and the rhythm that they instill in you as a comedian is very different. So when it's a big room, laughs come in bursts and waves, and you tell the joke, the laugh ebbs, and then it fades as one, and then there's this kind of awkward bit of silence, and then you do the next one, and in the room that's fine. A lot of the time, the way it's mixed and edited and put onto, I'm not saying laughs are put in, but the way the sound is mixed in the edit can make these laughs sound like kind of anonymous waves, Whereas in the smaller room, you can actually pick up individual laughs. You can and laughs, individual laughs like trail off other laughs. Some laughs start before other laughs. You can hear individual laughs in the room, and you can and I can start a line on the tail of an ending laugh, and I like stand-up like that. So I wanted to do that, and a room like the San Monomic Playhouse, which is like we had 250, 300 people in. The last special was 900 people, and it just is a completely different sound, and is the sound I wanted for this one.
I love the specificity of the sound for you as well, because I also feel like when I watch your stand up that you're very specific with the idea of silence and pauses within the rhythm and the pacing of it as well. And is that
Mm.
something that you're thinking quite intentionally about, or does it just naturally come from the pacing of the material for you?
It comes from the pacing of the material, but it also comes from the audience. I don't. This is a bit wanky, but I do kind of sometimes think of stand up as a musical performance, and your instrument is the audience, and you're a pianist or whatever, and yeah, you have to. It's the audience is this organ that you can play, but that can get away from you. You can start just playing its own notes, and so you kind of half in control of this instrument. And I find that when I'm in a really big room, I'm in less control of this instrument. Whereas in a smaller room, I'm in a lot more control. And I prefer the way the audience sounds in this one.
And there's something very fun with British audiences as well that you point out, that
Mm.
even though British audiences have purchased a ticket to come to a comedy show to see you, it's almost like you still have to win them over. And the compliment that you might get or might overhear is, that was quite good actually, as someone leaves
Yeah.
the theater. Like, and so
Yeah.
with that, how do you feel like, even though that they've come specifically to see you, that you're still spending that hour trying to make sure that you win them over onto your side at the same time?
I I'm in two minds about it. It does feel completely unfair, and it's a very British thing to make you work for something you should already be able to take for granted. But at the same time, I think some American comedians can fall for the opposite trap, where audiences are too giving, and the quality control goes out the window. And it happens all the time that American comedians come over to the UK and they do a joke and it doesn't get what they expect, and they kind of go off they're a bit lost. You can see, but British audiences they really have to be won over. And so I think it's a two-edged sword. Don't get me wrong. When I've done gigs in America, I've loved it. People are so fun. They're so up for it. They're so supportive. They're happier. Let's be honest. They're happy. I mean, you will know this yourself. They're happier, and they're less embarrassed about being happy. That's the fundamental messed up thing. If a British person, a happy British person, is humiliated, they're embarrassed. Is humiliated that they're happy. They don't want people to know that they're happy. They think it's uncouth. So that is something you have to overcome as a comedian in the UK. But I've been shaped by them. I love British audiences. They've made me the comedian I am today. They made me the person I am today, and um I value them for it. But they could be a little easier if they
There's
wanted
also
to.
something I've heard you talk about, that when you come out, that you always want to do something right in that opening to make the audience feel like you're present with them, and that is part of the journey of building a relationship with them from the offset. And so it kind of goes back a little bit to us talking about the opening, but with this show in particular, how did you want to make sure that they felt that immediate presence and rapport with you?
Your research on stuff I've said is so deep. Some of these things are like, did I just think that once? I don't know how you know this, but sorry. Um, yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, an audience can really turn off if they think you're on autopilot. And it's easy to seem like you're on autopilot. And a small thing like acknowledging something in the room or where you are in the country or where you are in the world can really make a difference. And one thing I find really fun about touring, going to Australia or America or New Zealand or Canada or Sweden, I've done Sweden, is coming up with like, and by the end of, if I'm there for a few weeks, I'll have come up with like 5-10 minutes at the beginning that's just about that place. And it's so fun to write to that kind of brief, and it really gets the audience on side. They just need to know that you're there. So I think it is important for sure. The only That said, that's what I think marks out a special as different from a live tour show. A special, I think, benefits from just getting straight into it, which is why I go into straight into it on the special. I would not open a tour show the way I open this special, because I think they're very different. Uh, but I think if I started the special by going, "Hi, London, how's it going? Wow, wooden room, huh? Here we are on the South Bank. Y'all get the number 205 bus." Disaster. But if it's a live show, they're completely different things. So I think you need to know, how the majority of people are going to experience the show and design it towards them.
I love that. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done as appearing on a lot of the panel quiz shows on TV in the UK, because I think it's so interesting that when you first start out doing that, that sometimes you end up doing these test, almost practice panel shows where essentially
Mm.
it's not for air. You're in a boardroom and there's a group of other comedians and there's maybe people from the office who had a spare hour to come and sit and listen and be an audience for the people who are watching and observing you. And I was just really interested in what that experience was like going into that pretend
Wow.
setup that's
Did you
such the
did you used to
antithesis of the
work?
live audience.
Did you used to work in production here?
No,
Wow. Okay. This is a deep
just
cut.
read
This
about
is
it online because I love
all
it.
right. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Um, yeah, it's been a while since I did one of those, but they are odd. And you are sat in a room, in like a meeting room, and people have just set up a table, and you're there with the producers, and and uh, and you're just talking to a room of people who are either annoyed they've been dragged in or too ready to laugh, and it sounds sort of fake. Yeah, it's a weird process, but we put ourselves through a lot of weird things in this job. It's a weird job.
I mean, even just the act of being a panelist on those shows feels like it's a very different comedic space to play within. Firstly,
It
instead
is.
of having a stage and getting up and moving around, you're sitting behind a desk, so you don't have the element of movement and interaction with the audience in the same way. You're not.
Honestly, from I find the hardest part of panel shows is the sitting down. It's really, really hard to think sat down. I mean, that's why, yeah, people, when you think you're pacing, it really helps to walk up and down. So when I'm sat down on a panel show, I find it like I could feel, you can tell that I'm just slower. I'm just finding it hard to think, and and you're trying to get stuff. You're trying to time it so that you're not stepping on someone else's lines, but getting your own lines in. It's tough, man. It's a minefield, but there's some I really enjoy doing. I love. I've done Have I Got News for You a lot of times here, and I love that one. I find that really fun to do. Um, the others are also good, but I like talking about the news. I think what I really love. I like talking about serious stuff. Maybe so. I think that's what why that show lends itself to me.
I've been
But
to
but
taping.
most comedians will say they find panel shows difficult. It's not their natural environment, really.
Yeah. I've been to tapings of a few in the past as well, and it's so interesting to watch the way it comes together, because essentially for 25, 30 minutes of on-air material, you can be there for 2.5, 3.5 hours to get it.
Yeah.
And so do you have to have a cognizance of making sure that references or things that you're interlacing later on in the recording will make sense and tie back, because obviously you don't know if the earlier context is going to make the edit or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a gamble. If you could keep referring back to a joke, make it harder and harder for the editor not to keep it in. You can kind of bully your way into the edit that way. Uh, the best way to do it, which doesn't work in my favor because it's not the kind of person I am, is just to say as much as possible and just play the game of averages, because and not to be effective when something doesn't get a laugh. That's what I always find hard. Is if I do something that doesn't get a laugh, I'm like, I'm stupid. But if you're good at it, you just let it go. Imagine it never happened. Because as far as the edit's concerned, it never happened. Just keep going. Next thing, next thing, next thing, next thing. Yeah. So it's good if you're a prolific content creator like that, because it's just about saying things. But I'm not really chatty. I'm not a chatty person. What I like about stand up is its structure, and that it's my turn to talk for 20 minutes to an hour, and no one else can talk. You'll get kicked out. I like that. So a panel show where we need to be chatty is not really
Yeah.
my natural environment.
I did love that you mentioned Have I Got News for You, though, because that one you also had the opportunity to host. But when you got the chance to host it, it was a very last minute thing where you got a phone call while you were at the pub the night before because the person that they'd booked had to pull out last minute. And going
Mm,
back to that idea of the deadlines kind of being something that can sometimes work in your favor, did you
yeah.
find it almost beneficial to not have too much time to get into your head about it?
Totally. I had such a blast hosting Have I Got His View, and I think a lot of that's to do with having had 5 hours to think about it. Because if I'd known, otherwise I would have known for months that I was going to do it, and I would have got really nervous and in my head and built it up and gone, "Oh God, this is such a big deal," and how am I going to make it work? It's very different from being a panelist. But because I just had to go straight in, and also felt like there was, that I had this caveat of, well, I was dragged in last minute, so if it didn't go well, then I could go, well, I'm actually helping out by coming in last minute. Meant I could relax, and it ended up going really well. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah. I love that. And looking back at this special now and with the fact that you were saying how it feels like the most authentically you piece that you've been able to put out at this point, what's the difference in the relationship that you feel like with you have with that material, even watching it now a little while after it was taped compared to the rest of your specials?
I I like it more, and I like me more in it. That is, I think, the trajectory you want in a career to be happier and happier with things you make. So I like it more, and I like me more in it. That would be the main difference for sure. That's my relationship with it, and I think it's a good sign that there are routines in it that I'm sad I don't get to do anymore because I did love doing them, and because they're still relatively new. Right up to the recording, I was coming up with new bits, and in previous years I would have gone, "Oh, that's a good new bit. Let's save it for the next show and keep doing routines that I've lost faith with." Whereas now, this time around, I was like, "I love this new bit. Great, I can get rid of that bit that I don't really like anymore and put in a new bit and make this as good a show as possible." And I think that comes across. So that's the I would say that's the biggest difference in my relationship with the material.
I love that answer and it's a great special. So congratulations. Thank you so much, Phil.
Awesome. Thanks, Mara. It's a pleasure talking to you. And I'm stunned by your level of knowledge and research.